Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when the most difficult decision isn't between right and wrong. It's between what looks right to the world and what actually feels right to your soul. I never imagined that I'd stand before hundreds of people, look at the future I had meticulously planned, and say the quietest word with the loudest consequences: no. No to the ceremony, no to the script I had rehearsed 1,000 times, no to the life that had been carefully built on expectations. I wasn't supposed to be that person. I was supposed to be the one walking down the aisle, smiling as if everything were perfectly aligned, but instead, I became the one who canceled the wedding. Not postponed, not rescheduled, canceled. And the weight of that decision wasn't just emotional. It was neurological, physiological, deeply human. And to explain why, I want to take you into the mind of someone who didn't follow the map, but followed the signal. That internal, invisible signal that comes not from noise or fear, but from a profound alignment between biology and truth. When I made that decision, people around me reacted with shock. It was like I had broken an unspoken contract. Because weddings, in our world, aren't just ceremonies. They are collective rituals, cultural, emotional, sometimes even economic frameworks. They tell the world, this is where my story is going. And so when someone chooses to step away from that path, it creates a ripple. It's like pulling a thread from a carefully woven tapestry. It shakes families, friendships, identities. But what most people don't realize is that before the external world reacts, your inner world already has. What happens neurologically in moments like these is extraordinary. The human brain, specifically the anterior cingulate cortex, is wired to detect conflict, not just external, but internal dissonance. It's the same region that lights up when something doesn't quite fit. For weeks, maybe months, that part of my brain was screaming in a language only I could hear. A subtle sense of misalignment, not with the person, but with the future. It started quietly. Tiny hesitations in the corners of conversations. A feeling of detachment when discussing plans that were supposed to bring joy. Smiling for photos while my limbic system, the emotional core, was whispering that something wasn't right. You see, emotional signals often appear long before rational explanations do. This isn't weakness. This is neurobiology. It's the brain's early warning system. I remember the night everything shifted. The invitations had already been sent. The venue was booked. And yet, at 20:13 a.m., while staring at the ceiling in a dark, quiet room, something inside me became crystal clear. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, unmistakable realization that I was about to live a story that wasn't mine. And in that clarity, my heart didn't race. It steadied. My breathing slowed. Because truth, even when it's terrifying, has a strange way of bringing stillness. When we talk about courage, we often imagine grand gestures. But courage is often the invisible moment before action. The second when your amygdala is flooding your system with signals of danger, and you still decide to lean into what's real. The amygdala doesn't know context, it only knows safety or threat. And to my nervous system, continuing down that path was a threat. Not because love wasn't present, but because the alignment wasn't. I want to be clear about something. Canceling a wedding isn't an act of betrayal. It can be, in its purest form, an act of radical honesty. And honesty, especially the kind that disrupts narratives, is not gentle. It burns away illusions. It strips layers of politeness, expectation, performance. And underneath it, it leaves a raw, trembling version of yourself. But that rawness, that trembling, is where true growth begins. In neuroscience, there's a phenomenon called prediction error. It happens when the brain's expectations don't match reality. Imagine you're about to step on a stair that isn't there. Your body jolts, your balance wavers, your mind recalibrates. That's prediction error. And when I canceled my wedding, I wasn't just confronting my own prediction error. I was confronting everyone else's. People had built emotional architectures around my future. Families had intertwined plans. Friends had marked calendars. To them, my story had already been written. And suddenly, it wasn't. Here's the strange thing about making a life. altering decision. It rarely feels triumphant in the moment. It feels messy, chaotic, lonely. The first morning after I made the call, I didn't wake up feeling liberated. I woke up feeling like someone had taken the script of my life and torn out an entire chapter. And that, neurologically speaking, is exactly what happens when you break a pattern your brain has already begun to encode. Our brains love predictability. It's efficient. It saves energy. So when you disrupt a major life pattern, your brain doesn't immediately celebrate. It panics. It floods your system with cortisol, the stress hormone. It initiates a threat response. You feel shaky, disoriented, sometimes even numb. This is why so many people stay in stories they know they need to leave, because the discomfort of truth can feel worse, temporarily, than the comfort of misalignment. But here's the critical part: discomfort is not danger. Discomfort is a sign of transformation. And in that raw, unsteady space, I learned something that years of studying human behavior and neurobiology had taught me. But I had never fully lived. You cannot build a sustainable future on emotional dissonance. You can mask it. You can decorate it with flowers and music and rituals. But the dissonance remains. And over time, the brain will always bring it back to the surface. One of the hardest conversations of my life happened the day I told the person I was supposed to marry that I couldn't do it. The words came slowly, trembling, as though my entire nervous system was resisting its own liberation. But in that moment, I watched something extraordinary happen. Their face shifted from shock to hurt to something quieter, understanding, because deep down they had felt it too. The human nervous system is a beautifully sensitive instrument. It knows when a melody is out of tune, even when the lyrics are perfect. We often romanticize the idea of sacrifice, of staying for the sake of others, of enduring for the sake of appearances. But biologically, sacrificing truth creates neural fatigue. It drains cognitive resources. It erodes well-being in invisible but measurable ways. People who live in sustained emotional dissonance show elevated stress markers, disrupted sleep cycles, and decreased executive functioning. That's not weakness. That's physiology trying to alert the mind to a deeper misalignment. In the weeks that followed, I learned what happens after you burn the map. First, there is silence. Then there is noise, the noise of judgment, whispers, opinions. People asked, "How could you do this?" As if protecting my mental and emotional integrity was an act of selfishness. But slowly, something even more powerful emerged: clarity. My mind, once tangled in the pressure of what should be, began to experience something it hadn't felt in months. Cognitive relief. When the prefrontal cortex is no longer fighting the limbic system, when logic and emotion stop being adversaries and begin to align, the brain enters a state of coherence. It's not bliss. It's not instant joy. It's a steady, clear awareness. I started noticing small things again. Light through the window, the quiet satisfaction of breathing without a weight on my chest. But I want to be honest with you. The hardest part wasn't the decision. It was the aftermath. It was sitting across from people I loved, explaining something they couldn't fully understand because they weren't the ones living it inside their skin. It was walking past what would have been our wedding date, feeling both grief and gratitude in the same heartbeat. And yes, it was facing my own reflection in the mirror, forgiving myself for choosing my own mind over the world's expectations. You see, the modern world often confuses bravery with external achievement. But the most radical form of bravery is internal alignment. It's looking at your future and saying, "Even if no one claps for this, I will not betray myself." Because at the end of the day, the only contract that truly matters isn't written in paper, isn't witnessed by hundreds, isn't sealed with rings or rituals. It's the contract between your mind and your truth. I spent years studying decision-making, neural feedback loops, and emotional regulation. And yet, none of that fully prepared me for the night I called everything off. Science can explain the how of our emotions, but only life can teach the why. The truth is, it's not about whether someone is good or bad. It's about whether two nervous systems, two life trajectories, Two internal compasses are genuinely aligned. Love without alignment is a beautiful illusion. But illusions, no matter how exquisite, eventually collapse under the weight of reality. And that's exactly what I felt in those final weeks. A soft but growing weight pressing against my chest, a pressure I couldn't rationalize away. My brain had already begun to build an architecture of resistance. The signals were clear: subtle anxiety during quiet moments, disrupted circadian rhythms, an inability to fully visualize the future without feeling a twinge of fear. These weren't random fluctuations. They were the nervous system speaking in its most honest language. I realized something crucial then. Your body will always tell you the truth before your mind is ready to admit it. The tightness in your stomach, the restless nights, the unexplained sense of distance, these are not nuisances. These are data points. They are the language of self-preservation. And yet, most of us are trained to override these signals, to smile through discomfort, to honor expectations over instincts. We call it being strong, being mature, being responsible. But true responsibility isn't about keeping the peace at the cost of your own psychological integrity. It's about building a life that doesn't require you to lie to yourself to sustain it. I remember sitting in the empty venue one last time before making the call. The chairs were neatly arranged. The air was still. Everything looked beautiful. And yet, standing there, I felt nothing. No excitement, no joy. Just an eerie silence inside me. And that silence was louder than any doubt, because joy doesn't hide. When something is right, your entire system aligns. When it's not, no amount of external beauty can fill the internal void. That night, I didn't run. I didn't make a dramatic escape. I simply sat with the truth long enough to stop being afraid of it. And in that stillness, the answer became unavoidable. I called off the wedding not because I didn't care, but because I finally did. Deeply, fiercely, honestly. There is something profoundly transformative about making a decision that no one else can make for you. For a long time, I had looked for external confirmations. A friend's opinion, a family member's reassurance, a sign from the universe. Anything to make the weight of the choice feel less solitary. But what I discovered was this: some decisions are meant to be made in silence, in the most private corner of your mind, where no applause or condemnation can reach you. We often underestimate how deeply our neural architecture is intertwined with the narratives we tell ourselves. As a neuroscientist, I've studied how long-term goals are encoded in the prefrontal cortex and how the brain invests energy into building frameworks around what it believes is coming. A wedding, in this sense, isn't just an event, it's a mental map. It becomes a structure upon which countless decisions are built: where you'll live, how you'll grow, who you'll become in the presence of another. When you tear down that structure, the brain experiences what's known as cognitive restructuring. It's a process of rewiring expectations, breaking down neural pathways that were built on assumptions, and rebuilding them on a new foundation. It is not a clean or linear process. It's messy. It involves doubt, guilt, grief, and a strange, unexpected kind of clarity. In the days after I made the decision, my mind felt like a city after a storm. Familiar landmarks were gone. Old routes no longer made sense. For a moment, there was only debris, scattered emotions, half-finished plans, lingering questions. But beneath that rubble was something extraordinary: space. And space is the birthplace of truth. I remember waking up 3 days later with a sensation I hadn't felt in months. The absence of a weight. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was lightness. The kind of lightness that comes when your mind no longer has to carry the burden of pretending. I sat at the edge of the bed, feeling my breath for the first time without constraint. My nervous system, once flooded with cortisol, was slowly shifting back toward balance. That's the thing about emotional truth. It doesn't give you immediate rewards. It gives you gradual alignment. It rebuilds your sense of self cell by cell, thought by thought. And over time, that alignment becomes something stronger than the applause of others. It becomes self-trust. One evening, a close friend came over. They didn't try to fix anything. They didn't ask for explanations. They just sat beside me in silence. And in that silence, I realized something essential. Not everyone needs to understand your decisions to respect them. Because decisions made in alignment with your core truth aren't public debates. They're private revolutions. But the human brain, in its brilliance, also craves narratives. It wants to understand why something happened, even when the truth isn't neat. So I spent hours replaying every moment in my mind, every conversation, every sign I had ignored, and slowly, the story began to emerge with stunning clarity. It wasn't about blame, it wasn't about right or wrong. It was about the simple, unshakable fact that love without alignment eventually corrodes. People often ask, how do you know the difference between fear and truth? It's a fair question, because fear can masquerade as intuition. But biologically, the difference is measurable. Fear is reactive. It spikes your heart rate, narrows your attention, and creates urgency. Truth, on the other hand, has a strange stillness to it. Even when it hurts, it feels clean. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't beg. It just sits quietly and waits for you to stop running. When I finally allowed myself to stop running, everything slowed down. I stopped imagining how people would react. I stopped calculating the fallout. I simply existed in the decision. And from that point forward, the storm outside no longer had the power to shake me the way it once did. A few weeks later, I attended a small gathering. There were people there who had once expected to be dancing at the wedding. Their smiles were polite, but behind their eyes, I could see the quiet question. Why? How could someone walk away from something that looked so perfect from the outside? I didn't offer them a tidy explanation. Because there isn't one. I simply said, because it wasn't real for me anymore. And that, though uncomfortable, was the truth. You see, perfection is often an illusion crafted for the external world. But the brain, your brain, always knows when something is real. It knows it in your pulse, in your breath, in the way your stomach tightens in certain conversations. Authentic connection doesn't need to be performed. It flows naturally. When it stops flowing, pretending doesn't fix it. It only delays the inevitable fracture. I often think of the moment I stood in the empty venue as the turning point of my life. It wasn't a dramatic scene from a movie. There were no tears streaming down my face, no music swelling in the background. Just quiet. Just stillness. Just the steady awareness that I couldn't build my future on a foundation that wasn't mine. And here's what I wish more people understood. Breaking a promise to the world is painful, but breaking a promise to yourself is unbearable. It seeps into every corner of your existence. It manifests as fatigue, as quiet resentment, as an unnameable ache in your chest. Over time, it corrodes your joy from the inside out. The irony is, I didn't cancel my wedding because I lacked love. I canceled it because I finally understood what love should feel like. Not as a performance, but as an alignment of inner worlds. Real love isn't just about staying. It's about staying where your soul can breathe. As someone trained to analyze human behavior, I had spent years understanding how attachment patterns shape our decisions. The brain becomes deeply intertwined with routine and belonging. When you plan a future with someone, your neural pathways begin to anticipate their presence in everything. The thought of removing that can feel like ripping out a part of your own identity. That's why people stay, even when the truth has already spoken. But there comes a moment, and for me, it was sitting alone on a quiet night with no distractions, when the truth becomes louder than fear. And in that moment, courage doesn't look like a grand gesture. It looks like a quiet phone call, a simple sentence, a trembling breath, and then everything changes. In the days that followed, I experienced something that science often describes, but rarely captures emotionally: the neurochemical rebalancing after a major life shift. My cortisol levels, once high, began to fall. My dopamine pathways slowly rewired, no longer dependent on a future that wasn't mine, and my prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning, began to build again. Not around a wedding, but around a life that felt real. One afternoon, I walked past a florist. For months, I had associated flowers with the wedding, bouquets, centerpieces, decorations. That day, for the first time, I bought flowers for myself. No meaning attached, no event, just life, just breathing. That's when I knew I had crossed the invisible threshold between loss and liberation. I won't lie to you. There were nights when doubt crept in like fog, when I replayed the what-ifs, when I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But each time, when I returned to silence, the truth was still there, unchanged, unshaken. Doubt is loud, truth is quiet, and eventually quiet wins. People often believe that walking away from something big means you've lost something irreplaceable. But what they don't see is what you gain: your own mind back, your own heartbeat, your own rhythm. And when you reclaim that, the world slowly begins to rebuild itself around you, one breath at a time. A few months after everything ended, I received a letter. It was from someone who had been at the edge of making their own impossible decision. They had watched my choice from a distance, quietly, without judgment, and it gave them the courage to choose themselves too. And that, more than anything, reminded me why telling the truth matters. It's not just about one life. It creates ripples. This experience taught me something that no textbook ever could. We spend too much of our lives trying to be understandable to others, and not enough time trying to be honest with ourselves. But the world doesn't need our perfection. It needs our truth. Because truth, unlike perfection, can sustain itself. And so I learned to breathe again. Not the shallow breaths of performance, but the deep, grounded breathing of someone who has nothing left to hide. And that is a kind of freedom you can't buy, can't fake, can't replace. I used to think weddings were the ultimate celebration of love. But now, I understand that the ultimate celebration of love is the ability to choose it honestly. Whether that means walking toward someone or walking away. Sometime after the storm settled, I found myself sitting alone in a cafe I used to frequent before all the wedding plans took over my life. The same corner table, the same quiet hum of conversations around me. But I was different. Not because the world had changed, but because the architecture of my mind had. It's strange how clarity doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives like sunlight slipping through curtains, quietly, persistently, undeniably. I took out a notebook I had once used to write down wedding details, the guest list, the song playlist, the color schemes. On that day, I opened to a blank page, no plan, no pressure, just the unshakable presence of myself. And for the first time in months, my hand didn't tremble, my thoughts didn't rush, my chest didn't ache. There was no script to follow, no story to uphold, just possibility. We live in a world that glorifies certainty. We are told to have clear answers, mapped out futures, tidy narratives. But the truth is, some of the most powerful decisions in life don't come with certainty. They come with honesty. They come with standing in front of 100 paths and choosing the one that lets you breathe, even if it's the loneliest one at first. In those quiet months, I learned that healing isn't linear. It's a language the body speaks before the mind translates it. Some mornings, I woke up feeling light, unburdened. Other mornings, the grief returned. Not because I regretted the decision, but because grief is the echo of a story that almost was. And that's okay. Grief doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you were brave enough to make one that mattered. I often think about the faces of the people who were there when I made that choice. Some were confused, some were angry, some were silent. But in the end, none of their reactions mattered as much as the look in my own eyes when I faced the mirror again. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was recognition. The quiet recognition of someone who had finally returned home to themselves. The science of self-trust is fascinating. The brain responds to integrity, not just external, but internal. When your actions align with your core truth, your stress response lowers, your prefrontal cortex gains stability, your vagus nerve regulates more smoothly. Your entire nervous system begins to trust your decisions again. And that is the foundation upon which a truly meaningful life is built. One evening, I visited the venue again, not to dwell on what could have been, but to thank it for what it revealed. The place looked the same, quiet, beautiful, waiting. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I stood at the center of the empty floor and took a long, steady breath. There was no pain, no regret, just gratitude. Gratitude for having the courage to walk away before betraying myself. And here's something I want you to hear clearly. Walking away from something that looks right on the outside, but feels wrong on the inside isn't failure. It's one of the highest forms of self-respect. It's an act of saying, my peace matters, my mind matters, my future matters. For a long time, I used to think courage was about charging into the fire. But now I know, real courage is sometimes about quietly walking away before the flames reach you. Not because you're weak, but because you understand what survival really means. Our society often romanticizes endurance. It celebrates people who stay, who push through, who keep smiling even when their hearts are whispering no. But what if true strength isn't about enduring every story we start, but about recognizing when a story has reached its natural end? What if strength is honoring the truth, even when it costs you everything familiar? In the months that followed, people asked me if I found someone else. As if love were a race with an instant replacement waiting at the finish line. But this wasn't about finding someone else. This was about finding myself again. And when you truly return to yourself, the kind of love you invite in, whether from others or from within, is different. It's not desperate. It's not performative. It's calm. It's whole. I began noticing small, quiet joys again. The way the world smells after rain. The feeling of stepping into sunlight after being indoors too long. The laughter that doesn't need explanation. And slowly, the future stopped being something I was running from. It became something I could walk toward. The human heart has an extraordinary capacity to heal when you stop forcing it to live someone else's story. And the mind, brilliant as it is, learns to trust again when your actions and your truth finally match. This is the science of alignment. Not just emotional, but biological. Every system in the body begins to recalibrate when you stop living in contradiction. I share this story not because it's unique, but because it isn't. All around us are people living lives they quietly know aren't theirs, staying in jobs, relationships, paths, identities that look perfect on the outside but feel hollow within. And sometimes all it takes is one voice, one story, one moment of brutal honesty to remind them that they're not alone. Canceling my wedding didn't make me fearless. It made me real. And being real is far more sustainable than being perfect. Perfection shatters under pressure. Realness bends, it breathes, it survives. If you're standing at a crossroads in your own life, if your body is whispering truths your mind is trying to outrun, I hope you listen. Not to the noise around you, not to the expectations pressing on your chest, but to that quiet signal inside. It may be inconvenient. It may be terrifying. It may cost you everything you thought you needed. But it will give you something infinitely more valuable, your own life back. The path forward after a choice like mine isn't about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming your narrative. It's about understanding that endings, when made in truth, are not losses. They are openings. Openings to live without performance, without masks, without silent negotiations with yourself. And here's the most unexpected part over time. The people who truly love you, not the idea of you, but you, will understand. They may not agree right away, but they'll see what alignment does to a human being. How it softens the edges. How it steadies the breath. How it makes you quietly radiant in ways performance never could. I used to think that love was proven in big, loud gestures. But I've learned that the deepest love you can give to another or to yourself is choosing what's true over what's easy, choosing silence over performance, choosing alignment over applause. So, as I stand here today, not in a wedding dress, not under a canopy, not in a script written by anyone else, but simply as a human being telling the truth, I want to leave you with this: your life is not a performance. It is not a promise you owe to other people's expectations. It is the single, extraordinary, unrepeatable story that only you can live, and the moment you decide to honor it, fully, fiercely, without apology, everything begins to change. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is walk away from a future that everyone else believes in, so you can finally build the one that you believe in. Thank you.